This technique can be used against dense energies in head area, which have been put there by others and which are an attempt to make one give up on life itself. Example: being spiritually connected to someone who smokes or drinks alcohol, or someone who is being a troll or psychic name caller. But it is actually possible to break such dense energies, causing a crack, such as the type experienced in yoga, right in the Ajna chakra. And we do this with a technique similar to the way in which Muslims pray, known as Rakas. First, more on the cathartic or stress-releasing cracks, as stress-releasing may be a good way of describing to those from a religious background. But where does stress actually come from? Stress comes from suppressive people whom we are connected to. Therefore, it is our duty to equalize those energies, and at the exact time of these rather cathartic cracks during any form of yoga practice, and providing they also feel good and stress-releasing, we are doing just that. Note: please make sure you have taken the pledge /initiation before listening any further.
Hey Grady, hey Sarah, hey Tom, hey Katie, hey Sebastian, hey Grady, hey Religion, hey Easy, hey Tom.
So after laying down a yoga mat on hard ground, standing minus any headwear and facing either north or east, it seems these bearings may be reversible to their directional opposites. For those located in the southern hemisphere, we first do a torso bend, which is like a full bow, keeping head, spine and tailbone aligned, while silently saying the short-range mantra, Zek Shaitan. This is 6th recitation way of saying Bismillah, the short-range mantra used by Muslims. And any newbie Muslims may be advised to just use this mantra throughout, until such time as committing the more usual prayers to memory. Do not underestimate sheer power of the mudra positions, shown in this practice, as evolved from the very peak of Roman gladiatordom. Hence, one can appreciate that any zikr or mantras may be recited whenever needed, throughout the day, though can of course also be mixed in with the practice. But main essence of the practice lies with the action, and at time of writing I confess that I am yet to fully transpose the usual prayers during official salah into 6th recitation. But after having looked over the internet for picture of the torso bend, to include, I ended up having to draw my own, since all the pictures I found had hands pushing against the knees, while in that position. Though I suppose doing this can help any beginners keep alignment of head, spine and tailbone, as it should be possible to balance a full cup of tea and saucer on one's back. That's how straight it must be, and on this point, pictures of Muslims doing it beat any martial arts ones I found. I even searched for one with Bruce Lee, as think I recall him doing it perfectly in Enter the Dragon, but couldn't find it. The only martial arts one I found, showing someone doing it completely wrong, i.e., with a humped back. Slight stretch must be kept, enabling forward energy to emanate via top of the head, being the contact point during any practical use. Top of the head is one of the hardest parts of the body, probably even harder than elbows, and can assist in defense as well as attack. For example, a bare-fisted combatant punching into the top of someone's skull is more likely to damage their own fist, rather than the opponent. And this is how armies of Ras or HAE, which is what we say after mention of the Prophet, were trained, akin to Roman gladiators. Ras or, 6th recitation way of saying that, being Vohi, or Luki, himself having been trained by Rome, and armies of which had been commissioned by Rome in order to eradicate black Nubian Christians and Jews, who occupied lands in the region of Middle East and Jerusalem at the time. Obviously, very few people from such location would have ever priorly witnessed the combat skill and tactics of the Roman gladiators, which one would have had to physically travel all the way to Rome, in order to experience, there being no internet or satellite TV in those days. But a good analogy of evolution of this fight-finishing tactic into the arenas of ancient Rome, is the way in which modern tennis has evolved, since the 1930s. What began as a somewhat leisurely, easygoing game over a net, by today's standards, has since evolved into a twitchy, nerve-wracking exchange of consistent smash serve aces. And so one can well imagine surprise of the occupants of such cities and fortresses, when confronted with the cocksure armies of Ras or HAE. On enquiring as to identity of their leader, "I am last of the prophets," would have been the jeering response, meaning that he had been commissioned to put an end to the Jews and there somewhere in the region of 30,000 prophets. But after this, the nickname stuck, and I mean it with all respect, these techniques and mantras having evolved from the Prophet's teachings, after all. Since those seriously labeling Ras or HAE, a prophet, would be placing him, as well as themselves, into the realm of Yahudim, i.e. Jews, their God and their prophets. Though we will continue to refer to Ras or HAE as the prophet, since that is what we are expected to refer to him as. But after the torso bend, which is also known to cause some stress-releasing cracks in itself, once gotten used to, first straightening back up, then going down into first Raka, prostrating on knees with palms, forearms, forehead and bridge of nose touching the ground. Now if one has started off by mentally affirming the short-range mantra, it may or may not be natural to extend this into the long-range mantra, if learned referred to as Esoteric, 6th recitation transposition of the Muslim prayer known as Al-Ikhlas.
Satan, Lunang and Lorraine. Recreate, it's a hearing, it's a hijameg. Same as I, just same as dead. Just same as deep, a hearing, a reg.
But if one's mind goes blank before completing long-range mantra for example, then this is absolutely fine. Indeed, I would even go so far as to say that it is actually desirable, for if one's mind goes blank during any prayer or mantra, it means that one's wishes have reached divinity. And as anyone who may have previously done any form of spiritual practice, such as yoga or meditation, may know, There are countless nuances and variations to any technique. Therefore a few simple instructions usually work best, and perhaps the less directions that can be given, the better. But key element seems other than to do with if forearms are kept on the floor, or if forehead can touch the floor at same time as bridge of nose, depending on individual shape of these. But rather, in keeping the shoulders back, which seems to load up potential energy in being able to stretch top of the head forward, along the line of alignment. Only the individual can be judge of how much to stretch, or whether or not they have gathered enough potential energy to go for yoga crack in the Ajna chakra, which can be achieved by making small rolling forward/rotating head movements, while in that position. And if one other than gets that, do remember that this technique is far from any novelty or game. It is more likely to help someone who is being psychic badgered to the very brink of suicide, rather than someone who is merely there for the experience. I first discovered its benefits when a malpracticing dentist had purposely inserted someone else's inlay, in 2013, taking 3 months for me to be seen by the time records had been transferred to a new surgery. And I other than liked the idea of having to take constant painkillers until being seen, but did not try for any crack in Ajna chakra during this time. I think that occurred by accident during an almost 6-year period of severe psychic badgering. Ever since performing some of my own culture music at a local open mic night, end of 2014, only starting to show any improvement ever since deciphering the satanic zikr in 2017 satanic form of praying upload. Prior to that attempting to decipher all the recitations, as opposed to just sticking with one, which would have been akin to polytheism, as by the time one has worked out which chakra or recitation is required in any given situation, the enemy would have completely obliterated them left, right and center. I had also previously used the Raka position in alleviating lower back pain, whenever sleeping under a duvet in hot weather, ever since 2012, so plenty of spine movement and cracks for this, in place of the head movement. But after the crack has occurred, the once suppressor becomes conquered territory, hence we must now say the pledge forward/initiation prayer. So going back into the full Raka position, with palms, forearms, forehead and bridge of nose touching the floor, NB, Muslims will usually sit right up before going into Raka position for the second time, but I personally other than find this necessary. Also, I don't think they include this prayer during their form of salah, but then neither does their emphasis seem to be on yoga crack in Ajna chakra, since many of them are even praying with headwear on.
Hey Grady, hey Sarah, hey Tom, hey Katie, hey Severity, hey Grady, hey Raka, hey Easy, hey Sadie, hey Tom.
And have more recently started saying the above silently during Raka, while doing the chakric circular breathing, or any of the other techniques as outlined in Barbara Kurella's book Urban Tantra. But in my experience, There is seldom any third eye crack after this second part, hence I other than even attempt. Then before getting up, or right after the above bit, can say Satan Re-Ortu, sixth recitation way of saying, He Akbar, okay. Muslims put it as Hu Akbar, but sixth recitation is feminine recitation. Therefore simplified way of saying it would be, He Akbar. I don't know if it's just me, with permanent damage to right eye since 2012, but find I can usually pull myself up from that position by metaphysically grabbing onto an enemy from that side. So as I come up, they get pulled down. But then again, I also practice martial arts, which is a whole line of specialized training in itself. See link in description for my current martial arts training program, presented as a computer program. https://1drv.ms/. But how do we know if anyone is there to be grabbed onto? Well, if there are dense energies, then they can be hit, grabbed, or whatever. Exercises that can help to develop this type of tactile kinetic intuitiveness, shadow boxing, practicing on wooden dummy, myself personally using a steel one. Also single sticky hands. Thought it would go without saying, but may be worth mentioning that we are here dealing with equalization of forces, as opposed to the initiation of conflict, as far as enemies are concerned, and hence in line with the only two laws in Illuminati, rest of Illuminati data being merely advantages. Now for sake of completeness, thought I'd also include the medium range mantra, as may end up recording another podcast which goes more into techniques. See podcast uploaded prior to this. Anyone familiar with Islam? This is sixth recitation transposition of the one which begins A'udhu Billahi, so yes, we do have an enemy in sixth recitation, and that enemy is named Hai Kong. Though pure sixth recitation will name Jar as their fallen or enemy, more on that in a while. However, the recitation I come under is actually between 6th and 7th, so what I did was transpose some words or letters into 6th and some into 7th, Hai Kong being the full name for fallen, according to 7th recitation. Naming Jah or Yah as the enemy also seems to be in line with actual time of Rasul, HAE. Hence proof that 6th recitation may have been the dominant recitation at the time, more on that later. Enemy then being referred to as Yahudim, translating as those of Jah or Yah. I may go into how to actually transpose in the official podcast too, not the one just mentioned a moment ago, which goes into techniques, as that is one coming between first and second. But those of pure sixth recitation are likely to be more disturbed by metaphysical conflict, rather than pseudo-verbal conflict via the egoic mind, while those naming Hai Kong as fallen would be more likely to find initiation of conflict via egoic mind the most disturbing, out of the two. Hence, areas of conquest or improvement having been outlined. There are many applications for each of the mantras. For example, the short-range mantra can be said around an enemy and will open the pathway towards their destruction. Another application for the same mantra would be in releasing any spiritual blocks which may stand in the way of physically accomplishing even the simplest of tasks. And of course, this now leaves the ablution, as anyone familiar with Islam will probably be wondering, why nothing about any ablution even mentioned? And my stance on that is that there is a time for Rakas, and there is a time for ablution. I other than feel that one should strictly and pedantically follow the other. So one situation may call for ablution only, which by the way, I also other than follow any strict pedantic order with, and another situation may call for Raka only, or any other technique. Then yet another situation may indeed call for both.